Susan Miller pushed open the glass door of a Pilates studio in Austin, Texas. The air smelled faintly of lavender and polished wood, sunlight streamed across mats, and reformers lined neatly in the quiet room. Though the space radiated calm, her chest carried a storm. She felt both nervous and hopeful as she took her first step inside. The instructor greeted her with a warm smile. Sensing the mix of hesitation and curiosity, Susan nodded politely. Unsure if this was truly the place where her journey would begin, she stretched her hands nervously, clutching her water bottle. Around her, others prepared their equipment with quiet focus. Susan inhaled deeply, searching for courage. She chose a mat near the window, grateful for the sunlight spilling across the floor. It reminded her of mornings at her mother's house, when the world still felt whole. That memory tugged at her heart, but she refused to let it pull her down. Instead, she closed her eyes and whispered a silent promise she would try. The first movements felt awkward, as though her body resisted this new rhythm. Her muscles trembled, her breath came uneven, but she pressed forward. Slowly, her arms and legs obeyed, and her mind softened into focus. Each motion felt like a step into unknown territory, but also into possibility. Halfway through the class, Susan felt a spark of clarity. She realized she had been holding her breath, not only today but for weeks. The diagnosis still echoed in her heart, filling her with fear. Here, though, she exhaled. She let the air out fully, as though releasing a fraction of her pain, and it gave her space. As the class closed, the instructor spoke about balance between strength and grace. The words settled into Susan's spirit. She recognized this was more than exercise, it was a metaphor. Strength for carrying pain, grace for accepting it. She left the studio lighter than she had entered. Something had shifted within her. Walking back to her car, Susan paused beneath the Texas sky. The city buzzed in the distance, yet she carried silence inside. For the first time since the heavy news, she felt a flicker of control. Perhaps here, on this mat, she could reclaim her story. Perhaps here, she could plant hope again. Susan's thoughts returned to that moment in the doctor's office. The sterile smell, the charts on the wall, the voice that seemed to calm for such a storm. Alzheimer's, he had said about her mother. The word hung heavy, reshaping her world. It was not just her mother's diagnosis. It was her own fear. She had watched her mother forget small things first. The keys, a neighbor's name, the day of the week. They laughed at it then, brushing it aside as aging quirks. But now, each forgotten detail was a shadow of something larger. Each moment carried a weight Susan struggled to carry. She felt the ground shift. The nights were the hardest. Susan lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in the dark. Her mind chased possibilities, questions without answers. Would she to inherit this decline? Would her children one day face the same sorrow she now endured? Fear whispered endlessly, stealing her rest at work. Her colleagues noticed the distraction in her eyes. She smiled politely, answering their questions with half-formed words. Inside, she was far away, dwelling in memories and worries. Life outside her mind seemed blurred, but inside, it was a storm she could not escape. She felt powerless. One evening, sitting by her mother's bedside, Susan watched her drift in and out of clarity. A tender smile would appear, followed by confusion. Susan held her hand, torn between love and sorrow. That night, she whispered a vow. She would not surrender to despair. She would search for light. Back at home, she opened her laptop and began reading articles, studies, research about brain health and prevention. Words like nutrition, hydration, exercise, and learning appeared again and again. For the first time, she saw a door opening, not certainty, but possibility. And possibility was enough. As she bookmarked pages and scribbled notes, her chest lifted slightly. The weight was still there, but no longer crushing. She had a direction, a reason to fight. Her mother's diagnosis would not define only tragedy. It could also inspire transformation. Susan realized that hope was not gone yet, had simply been waiting. The next morning, Susan brewed green tea instead of coffee. She sliced fresh fruit, placing vibrant colors on her plate. It was a small change, but it felt like rebellion against despair. Each bite carried intention. She was not helpless. She was acting. She was choosing life. She began writing a checklist on her fridge. Eat natural foods, sleep at least 7 hours, drink water, learn something new, move daily. The list became her quiet anthem. Every time she opened the door, she reminded herself prevention was possible. Every step mattered, even the smallest ones. Her neighbors noticed her new walks through the park. She carried a notebook, jotting reflections between steps. She marveled at the crisp Austin air, the trees stretching skyward. Walking was no longer routine. It was meditation. It was her chance to train body and brain together. She embraced it fully. Curiosity soon pushed her beyond walking. She signed up for a nutrition class at the community center. Sitting among strangers, she felt nervous at first. But as the instructor spoke about food as medicine, she leaned in with excitement. Each note she wrote became a seed planted for her future. Her evenings changed to two. Instead of scrolling endlessly on her phone, Susan began reading again. Novels, articles, even puzzles filled her nights. She laughed when she struggled with crosswords, but smiled at the challenge. Learning, she realized, was another form of exercise. It stretched her mind, just like Pilates stretched her body. The changes were not perfect. Some days she craved old habits, fast food, late nights, distractions, but she forgave herself, choosing progress over perfection. Each morning was another chance. Slowly, she felt her body respond. Her mind lightened. She was carving a new path with courage. At the end of the week, she returned to the Pilates studio. This time, her steps were firmer. She wasn't just attending a class. She was embracing a way of life. Prevention was no longer a vague idea, it was her mission. And in that mission, she felt her spirit awaken with hope. Susan woke earlier than usual, greeted by soft morning light through her curtains. She prepared oatmeal with berries, savoring the natural sweetness. Hydration became ritual, a glass of water before every meal. These adjustments seemed minor, yet they built an invisible armor. She felt stronger, calmer, more in control. Her sleep improved as well. She turned off screens before bedtime, choosing calming music or a book instead. Nights once haunted by anxiety now offered rest. Dreams returned, vivid and comforting. Waking up refreshed gave her energy she hadn't felt in years. Sleep, she realized, was medicine for body and mind. She began practicing small breathing exercises throughout the day. In traffic, at her desk, even while cooking, she inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly. These pauses became her anchors. Stress still visited, but now she had tools. Breathing taught her to find calm in chaos. It became part of her resilience. Curiosity blossomed further. Susan enrolled in an art class, her fingers clumsy with brushes at first. Each stroke of color reminded her that learning was not about perfection, but discovery. The class filled her with joy, new skills, new challenges. They were sparks that kept her mind vibrant. Her circle of friends noticed the glow in her voice during phone calls. "You sound lighter," one commented. Susan laughed, admitting she felt renewed. It wasn't only Pilates, or food, or sleep. It was the combination, the harmony of choices, working together. She felt her future wasn't closing, it was opening. At the grocery store, she found herself reaching naturally for fresh produce, whole grains, and water. The habits no longer felt forced, they became her rhythm. Each purchase was an act of love for her future self. Even the cashier noticed her enthusiasm, joking that she looked like someone preparing for a marathon. By the time she returned to Pilates again, her body carried the proof of these changes. Her energy lasted longer, her muscles steadied faster, her focus deepened. She smiled as she stretched on the mat, realizing this was not about avoiding disease alone. This was about living fully, with courage and intention. Susan stood before the mirror in the gym, lifting weights with careful determination. Strength training challenged her in ways Pilates did not. The burn in her arms and legs reminded her that her body was capable of more. She alternated between the gym and the studio, finding balance in variety. At first, the machines intimidated her. Rows of treadmills and weights seemed overwhelming. But step by step, repetition by repetition, she grew comfortable. Trainers encouraged her progress, noting her commitment. The fear of judgment melted away. Instead, she felt pride. This was her journey, and she was walking it bravely. Returning to Pilates, she noticed the difference. Her posture improved, her breathing steadier, her focus sharper. Movements that once felt foreign now flowed naturally. Each class became less about surviving and more about thriving. She could feel her strength expanding, her resilience deepening. The body and mind were uniting. One day, mid-class, the instructor spoke about alignment. When the body finds alignment, the mind follows. The phrase struck Susan deeply. It wasn't only physical posture, it was life itself. She needed alignment in habits, relationships, and choices. The thought stayed with her long after class ended. She began journaling about alignment, writing reflections each evening, align with health, align with hope, align with purpose. These words became her mantra. Every action, from meals to movement, was guided by this alignment. She smiled, reading her own words, recognizing growth unfolding inside her. The aches in her lower back that once troubled her began to fade. Climbing stairs no longer left her breathless. Even simple tasks, like carrying groceries, felt lighter. These small victories mattered. They were signs that her commitment was working, transforming her life piece by piece. She celebrated each one. By the end of the month, Susan realized Pilates was no longer just an activity. It was her passion, her sanctuary, her mirror of growth. She whispered to herself as she left class, "I came here to protect my mind, but I'm discovering my whole body is healing too." And she believed it. Weeks into her practice, Susan noticed subtle but powerful changes. Her shoulders rested naturally, no longer tense from worry. Her breathing slowed during stressful moments, giving her calm she hadn't felt in years. She stood taller, moved easier, and smiled more often. Pilates was reshaping not only her body, but her spirit. Her friends commented on the glow in her face. "You look different," they said, and she laughed softly. Inside, she knew it was true. It wasn't makeup or luck, it was commitment. The small habits stacked together, creating transformation. She was living proof that resilience could shine through daily choices. One morning, while tying her shoes, Susan realized her back pain had nearly vanished. She paused, astonished, remembering how those aches once shadowed her days. Now, strength held her upright, balance steadied her steps. The absence of pain felt like a gift, and she whispered gratitude aloud. Even her mind grew sharper. At work, she finished tasks with focus and clarity. Her memory seemed steadier, her thoughts less scattered. She realized prevention wasn't only about avoiding decline, it was about elevating the present, living with vitality today. That realization fueled her determination even more. During one class, the instructor guided them through a challenging sequence. Susan struggled, wobbling at first, but pushed gently forward. When she finally completed it, a surge of pride filled her chest. She had not only conquered the movement, but the voice of doubt inside her. She was stronger than she imagined. As she rolled up her mat, she whispered to herself, "This is working." The phrase was both relief and motivation. It wasn't only exercise, it was healing. Each session built resilience, courage, and hope. She walked out of the studio knowing she was stepping into a new version of herself. That night, she journaled about her progress. Words spilled across the page: strength, courage, clarity, peace. She realized this was not a temporary phase. It was a lifelong path she wanted to walk. Pilates had given her a new beginning, and she embraced it with open arms. At a cafe in downtown Austin, Susan met her friends for their usual Saturday gathering. The aroma of coffee filled the air as they laughed about daily stories. But when the conversation turned to health, Susan's eyes lit up. She leaned forward, eager to share her journey. She told them how Pilates transformed her days, how her body felt alive and her mind clearer. "I went to protect my brain," she said with a smile, "but I ended up caring for my whole body." The group paused, touched by her sincerity. Her words carried weight beyond casual chatter. Her friends asked curious questions, some skeptical, others inspired. Susan answered with warmth, describing simple exercises and the peace she found in them. She didn't preach, she simply shared joy. Her authenticity made the story powerful. They could see it wasn't theory, it was lived experience. One friend admitted she often struggled with stress and sleepless nights. Another mentioned constant back pain. Susan listened carefully, offering encouragement. She knew she wasn't an expert, but her own progress was undeniable. Hope glimmered in their eyes as they considered trying Pilates. The conversation drifted back to laughter. But Susan noticed the shift. Seeds had been planted. Possibilities opened. Her journey was no longer private, it was becoming contagious. She realized that by caring for herself, she was quietly inspiring others. That thought filled her heart with warmth. Later that evening, she reflected on the cafe moment. She realized transformation is never just personal. It radiates outward. Every smile, every word of encouragement could change another life. She had entered Pilates seeking prevention, but it was becoming a way to spread hope. That was a gift she cherished. As she closed her journal, she whispered, "This is only the beginning." She felt her story stretching beyond herself, touching those around her, and she promised to keep sharing, not for recognition, but for the joy of lifting others. Her journey had a purpose greater than she imagined. Her two sons lived in different cities, each chasing his own path. David was a runner, passionate about marathons. Mark loved soccer, playing weekly with friends. They admired their mother, but often teased her about new hobbies. Still, they noticed the change in her tone and energy whenever she called. On a phone call one evening, Susan spoke about Pilates with such excitement that they both laughed. "Mom, you sound like an ambassador," David joked. But behind the laughter, they felt her conviction. Her story didn't sound like a passing fadit, sounded like transformation. Curiosity grew inside them. Weeks later, David signed up for a local Pilates studio near his apartment. At first, he struggled, unused to the slow, controlled movements, but soon he noticed his runs felt smoother, his posture better. His body recovered faster after training. He called his mother, amazed, and thanked her for the push. Bach followed soon after, joining a studio recommended by a friend. His soccer games had often ended with complaints of sore knees and tight muscles, but Pilates gave him new strength and flexibility. One evening, after a match, he texted Susan, "No pain today. You were right." Her heart swelled with joy. Though miles apart, the three of them found a new connection. Their calls were filled with discussions about instructors, exercises, and progress. They laughed about wobbly moments, celebrated small victories, and encouraged each other. Pilates had become their common language, bridging the distance between cities. Susan marveled at how her journey rippled outward. She had stepped into the studio for her own healing, yet now her sons were reaping the benefits too. It was a reminder that courage is contagious. Her heart brimmed with pride, not for herself, but for the strength she saw in them. She wrote in her journal, "Prevention is not lonely, it multiplies." Her sons' voices echoed in her heart as proof. Together, though apart, they were building resilience as a family. And Susan realized this was one of life's greatest gifts, to inspire her children by example, without ever demanding it. Susan sat at her kitchen table, the phone on speaker, laughter filling the room. David described his latest Pilates challenge, while Mark joked about nearly falling during balance work. Susan smiled, her heart swelling. Though each practiced in different studios, the shared experiences drew them closer than ever. Conversations that once revolved around schedules and quick updates now bloomed with depth. They spoke about health, resilience, and how their bodies were changing. Susan realized these were not just casual chats, they were anchors. Pilates had become a bridge connecting their hearts across miles. One Sunday, the three decided to set shared goals. David aimed to improve his core strength for running. Mark wanted more agility for soccer, and Susan focused on balance and posture. They promised to check in weekly, not as competition, but as encouragement. Their voices carried unity. Susan often hung up the calls with tears of gratitude. Her sons were not only listening, they were walking the path with her. She felt less alone, more supported, as though they were holding hands across the distance. Hope flowed stronger in her veins, carrying her through difficult days. Sometimes, they even discussed their grandmother. The sadness lingered, but now their words carried a new tone. They spoke not only of loss, but of prevention. They wanted to build resilience, to face the future with courage. Susan realized the conversation had shifted from fear to action. Her journal entries glowed, with phrases like, "Together we rise," and "family rooted in hope." She knew not every day would be easy, but these connections gave her strength. The bonds that Pilates nurtured were priceless. They reminded her she was not fighting alone. One evening, Susan whispered to the night sky, "Thank you." Her gratitude was not only for her health, but for the closeness of her sons. She had found in Pilates not just personal healing, but a family revival. It was a transformation she had never expected, yet deeply cherished. Michael, Susan's husband, watched quietly from the sidelines. He loved her, but her new habits puzzled him. He preferred comfort foods, long evenings on the couch, and laughter from television shows. Exercise felt like punishment, not pleasure. He admired her discipline but doubted it was for him. Susan never pressured him, though she often shared her joy. He noticed her brighter mood, her lighter steps, her radiant energy. It was undeniable she was changing for the better. Still, he crossed his arms, joking that Pilates looked like stretching for professionals. Deep down, though, he wondered. One evening, after a long day, Michael groaned about stiffness in his back. Susan listened gently, then suggested he join her at the gym. "Just try," she smiled, not demanding, just inviting. He hesitated but finally agreed. curious if it might help. The next day, they walked into the gym together. At first, Michael felt lost among machines and mats, but with Susan's encouragement, he lifted light weights, stretched carefully, and practiced breathing. To his surprise, the stiffness eased slightly. He raised an eyebrow, amused. Perhaps this wasn't as ridiculous as he thought. Hope flickered faintly inside him. The following week, he attended a Pilates class with her. He struggled, wobbling through simple moves, laughing at himself. But afterward, he admitted he felt strangely energized. His joints loosened, his body lighter. The skepticism didn't vanish, but it cracked. Something in him shifted, opening a small door. Susan beamed. Not because he was changing, but because he was willing to try. She knew this was only the first step, but it mattered. His presence beside her made the journey less lonely. They walked out of the studio together, holding hands like they hadn't in years. That night, as they sat on the porch under the Texas stars, Michael confessed, "Maybe you're onto something." Susan smiled, knowing this was the beginning, not of perfection, but of possibility. Together, they were stepping into a new chapter unbuilt, not only on prevention, but on shared courage. Michael continued joining Susan at the gym and occasionally at Pilates. At first, he moved awkwardly, unsure of his balance, but week after week, he noticed changes. His stiffness eased, his energy returned, and he even shed a few pounds. The results surprised him more than anyone. He confessed one night at dinner, "I didn't think this would work for me." Susan smiled knowingly, grateful he had given himself the chance. Their laughter filled the kitchen as they shared healthier meals together. It wasn't only his body improving, it was their connection as a couple strengthening. At work, Michael's colleagues noticed his improved posture and lighter mood. He admitted, half shy, that he had started Pilates. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to curiosity. "You, Pilates." They laughed, but he shrugged proudly. The disbelief only fueled his determination to keep going. He began sleeping better, waking with less pain. Simple movements, like bending to tie his shoes or climbing stairs, felt easier. Susan observed these victories with joy. She realized transformation comes in many forms, and sometimes the most beautiful one is shared progress. They were growing together. On weekends, they spent time outdoors more often. Walks in the park replaced long afternoons on the couch. Michael still enjoyed his comfort foods, but now with balance, he found himself craving the energy he felt after movement. Exercise was no longer punishment, it was possibility. Susan saw admiration in his eyes when she spoke about prevention. He respected her journey and now felt part of it. The resistance was fading, replaced by curiosity and hope. She knew this was just the beginning for him, and that gave her deep satisfaction. One evening under a Texas sunset, Michael whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Susan held his hand tightly. It wasn't about persuasion, but inspiration. She had lived her truth, and that truth had pulled him forward. Together, they were stepping into resilience. Despite the progress in her own life, Susan still faced heavy moments with her mother. Each visit revealed more confusion, more dependency. It was heartbreaking to watch the vibrant woman she once knew fade into fragments of memory. The sorrow pressed against her chest like a weight. One afternoon, her mother looked at her with distant eyes, unable to recall her name. Susan smiled softly, hiding the ache inside. She held her mother's hand, whispering stories from the past. Even if the memory didn't return, the warmth of love remained. That connection could not be erased. Driving home, Susan cried quietly, letting the grief flow. Yet amid the tears, she remembered her vow. She would not drown in despair. She would transform pain into purpose. Her mother's struggle was not the end of hope, it was the beginning of her mission. She returned to her checklist, reading the words like a mantra: natural food, hydration, sleep, learning, movement. Each step was more than routine, it was resistance against fear. "The prevention is possible," she whispered to herself. These words gave her strength to keep moving forward. At Pilates, she carried this determination into each class. Every stretch, every breath, felt like defiance against hopelessness. She wasn't only training her body, she was defending her future. The mat became her battlefield, not of violence, but of courage. The instructor noticed her intensity and offered a gentle reminder to embrace grace as well as strength. Susan nodded, realizing balance was key. It wasn't about fighting endlessly, but about living fully, even in the presence of loss. Acceptance and prevention could coexist together. That night, Susan journaled with tears on the page. I cannot change my mother's path, but I can honor her by choosing a different one for myself. Prevention is possible, and I will carry that light." Her sorrow turned into resilience, her grief into determination. As weeks turned into months, Susan noticed resilience settling deep within her. Life still offered challenges, but she responded differently now. Stress no longer controlled her. She breathed through it, moved with it, and grew stronger from it. Resilience had become her quiet companion. Her friends marveled at her consistency. "You never give up," they said, impressed by her routine. Susan smiled, knowing it wasn't discipline alone, but purpose. She wasn't exercising for appearance. She was building a shield, one that guarded her mind, her spirit, and her future. One evening, she led a small group at the community center, sharing her journey. She spoke about prevention, about simple habits that build powerful change. The room was filled with nodding heads and curious eyes. She realized her story was not hers alone. It was a message others needed. During one session, a woman confessed her fear. Her father had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Susan listened with empathy, then offered gentle encouragement. "Prevention is possible," she told her. "Every choice counts. It may not erase the fear, but it gives us strength to face it." The woman thanked her with tears, and Susan felt her heart swell. It wasn't about solving every problem. It was about offering hope, courage, and companionship. Resilience wasn't only personal, it was something she could share. Her mission was expanding, reaching beyond her own home. At Pilates, Susan felt this deeper purpose flowing through her movements. Each stretch carried meaning, each breath intention. She realized the mat was not only a place of healing, but of empowerment. She was transforming into someone who could lift others as well. As she left the studio, she looked at the sunset over Austin. The city lights flickered on, but her spirit burned brighter. Resilience, she realized, was not an end. It was a way of living, and she was determined to live it every single day, with courage and with grace. One morning, Susan woke with clarity. She sat at her kitchen table, tea in hand, and wrote in her journal, "Pilates is not only exercise, it is my purpose." The realization washed over her like sunrise. She had found meaning in movement, hope in every breath. Her journey had started with fear, but it had led her to transformation. Each step, each choice, had built a new version of herself. She wasn't running from her mother's illness anymore. She was walking toward her own prevention, her own resilience, her own future. At the studio, she shared openly with others. She spoke about alignment not only in body, but in life. She encouraged newcomers with kind words, offering both comfort and motivation. The instructor smiled, watching Susan evolve from student to source of inspiration. Her family noticed too. Michael admired her determination. Her sons respected her strength. Together, they had all changed. Touched by her journey, she realized her purpose wasn't just personal, it was relational. Her transformation was rippling outward, weaving hope through the lives of others. She even started writing articles for the community newsletter, sharing tips on brain health, nutrition, and exercise. Her words were simple but heartfelt. Readers thanked her, some even joining Pilates because of her encouragement. She realized purpose shines brightest when shared. Walking home one evening, Susan passed a mother and daughter, laughing together. The sight touched her deeply, reminding her of her own mother. Though pain lingered, she felt peace. She was honoring her mother not through sorrow, but through action. Purpose had replaced despair. That night, she whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you, Mom. You led me here." The words were both farewell and gratitude. Susan felt her purpose settle firmly within her soul. She was ready to keep shining, carrying the message of hope wherever it was needed. Susan stood once more in the Pilates studio, sunlight streaming across the floor. Around her, new students stretched nervously, just as she once had. She smiled, remembering her first day. Now, she was no longer the beginner. She was the example of what was possible. After class, she spoke warmly to those who lingered. She shared her favorite phrase, "I came here to care for my brain, but I ended up caring for my whole body." The room filled with nods and quiet smiles. Her story gave them hope that transformation could be theirs too. Susan's voice carried beyond the studio. She often encouraged people in her community, reminding them that prevention matters. "Take care of your mind, your body, your future," she said. Her words carried sincerity, born from lived experience. People listened because they felt her truth. At family gatherings, she spoke with compassion to those caring for parents or grandparents with Alzheimer's. She never minimized the pain. But she always offered hope. Prevention is possible, she told them. We cannot change everything, but we can choose to live with courage today. Her sons and husband stood proudly by her side, inspired by her journey. Together, they embodied resilience, showing that change was not only possible, but contagious. Susan felt joy knowing her story had touched not only her family, but many others. One evening, as the Texas sky burned with orange light, Susan reflected on her path. She had turned fear into purpose, sorrow into strength. She realized her journey was not about escaping Alzheimer's shadow, but about shining brighter in its presence. That was true prevention living fully now. She lifted her journal and wrote in bold letters, "Prevenez, the prevention of Alzheimer's is possible." Closing the notebook, she smiled. Her mission was clear, her heart unshaken. Susan knew she had not only transformed her own life, but had become a beacon of hope for many.